I interviewed for the Giants position. I was set to interview on Thursday, the Monday prior. Before I interviewed, I received a text message from Bill Belichick saying congratulations on the Giants. You've seen him through the text messages. He was actually thought he was texting Brian Daboll.
You make claims that you were offered $100,000 for each game this team lose. Subsequently, to get a better draft pick.
I didn't grow up with a lot. And this game, changed my life. So to attack the integrity of the game, that's what I felt was happening in that instance.
Remember the lawsuit brought by ex-Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores? Well, folks, it appears we may have proof to cement Flores' claims. Steve Wilkes, a black man who was barely given a shot to coach the Arizona Cardinals, has signed on to the lawsuit. Ray Horton, who has been in the NFL coaching world since 1994, also signed on. Horton, former defensive coordinator of the Tennessee Titans, in 2014-2015, interviewed for the head coaching spot. Lawyers said the interview was a completely sham interview done only to comply with the Rooney Rule and to demonstrate an appearance of equal opportunity and a false willingness to consider a minority candidate for the position. The Titans hired Mike Mularkey, who is white, for the job, and Horton left to be the defensive coordinator in Cleveland. He has since retired. And here is Mike Mularkey, who spilled the tea of the interview process on a podcast.
It's a very cutthroat business, and a lot of guys will tell you that, but I allowed myself at one point when I was in Tennessee to get caught up in something I regret. I still regret it. But the ownership there, Amy Adams Strunk and her family, came in and told me I was going to be the head coach in 2016 before they went through the Rooney Rule. And so I sat there knowing I was the head coach in 16 as they went through this fake hiring process, knowing a lot of the coaches that they were interviewing, knowing how much they prepared to go through those interviews, knowing that everything they could do, and they had no chance of getting that job. And actually the GM, John Robinson, he was in on the interview with me. He had no idea why he's interviewing me, that I have the job already. And I feel, I regret that's because I pride myself in my kids first, that they do the right thing. And I always said that to the players, and here I am, the head guy, not doing it. And I've regretted that since then. It was a wrong thing to do. I'm sorry I did that, but it was not the way to go about it. Should have interviewed like everybody else and got hired because of the interview, not early on. So that's probably my biggest regret.
Well, that sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? It also sounds pretty important. We reminisce back to this.
I did interview with the Carolina Panthers before John Fox got the job, and I can recall that we had lost to the Steelers in the second round of the playoffs. And I remember sitting home on Monday, and I think it was Chris Mortensen or someone else reported that Foxy would be named the head coach of the Panthers on Friday.
Like longtime Bengals coach Marvin Lewis, lest we forget another potential smoking gun, the text message between Bill Belichick and Brian Flores, when the Patriots head man thought he was texting Brian Daboll, congratulating him on the gig, when the New York Football Giants hadn't even completed the interview process, and yes, the Rooney Rule requirement of meeting with Flores, plus Flores' allegations of then Broncos GM John Elway and Joe Ellis, the team's president, showing up hours late to their interview, appearing to be hung over as they met for the team's head coaching position. Flores felt the only reason he was interviewed was so the team could comply with, of course, the Rooney Rule, an assertion the team has denied. When ESPN reached out to Mularkey, by the way, seeking comment, his response was simple and to the point. "I believe you have the truth and what you need," he told ESPN via email. Prefer not to comment any further.
All of these people have one thing in common. They're all at risk for CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a brain disease caused by repetitive hits to the head.
So as your head is moving back and forth, your brain is twisting and turning and contorting, and the tissue is getting stretched.
The idea that we have this concussion issue under control is a myth. We're still not recognizing all the concussions that happen. That repetitive subconcussive injury, where you may not even feel it, adds up over time.
Seen here is Chris Nowinski, an ex-athlete who holds a PhD and is co-founder/CEO of the Concussion Legacy Foundation. All right, when we think about concussions, it appears, at least to me, when it comes to football and soccer and rugby, people, it seems like in the public at least, are accepting of the fact of that link. However, what this piece is going to show you, how different sports entities are continuing to fight this information in the trenches.
There's nothing more important than the player health and safety.
Well, this is a lie in more ways than one.
A lawsuit claiming the NFL uses race as a factor in determining which former players are compensated for suffering head injuries.
You can't say you care about the players and their health, then do this. You also can't say you care about concussions, then blackball the man who discovered CTE in your players, that being Dr. Bennet Omalu with Webster. A story I love bringing up is how intentionally defiant the NFL was in making the link between head injuries and football. The NFL committed $100 million to concussion research, which, let's be real, sounds glitzy, but it's why we must always dig deeper. The results of said digging showed the NFL did indeed study CTE, that being brain injuries in horse jockeys. Fortunately for Goodell, it appears he has another sport doing the same song and dance.
I myself have been, concussed several times, and at the time you almost sort of see it, if you can sort of shrug it off and come back on and play again, you almost see it as a badge of honour.
That being another form of football, Australian football that is. This is Alan Pierce, associate professor and leading researcher into concussions in the world of sports. The Guardian reported he signed a $60,000 contract with the AFL to, as they put it, carry out neurological tests on retired players who had concussions during their playing careers. Despite the AFL funding the project, Pierce said it appeared reluctant to cooperate until the project was nearly finished, wrote the outlet. The AFL is under increasing pressure to disclose what became of the study and to clarify the evidence that informs the league's concussion policies after it was revealed their lead concussion advisor, Dr. Paul McCrory, had been accused of plagiarism. Pierce said after his work on the impact of concussion on the health of athletes started to gain recognition, he was approached by AFL official Patrick Clifton in early 2015 to conduct a study running a series of neurological tests on retired players who had suffered concussions during their playing careers. Pierce agreed, and after further discussions, signed a contract in March 2016 to receive funding from the league until 2018 to complete the work. And that is where we must bring back that name, Dr. Paul McCrory, sports neurologist. To give you a taste, let's say, of his views on the subject at hand, he said the issue of concussions was overblown, even arguing that the dangers of concussions in the NFL are not nearly as serious as some reports, and accused the media of oversimplifying a complex topic. And not for the first time, he questioned the significance of NFL-related findings tabled by BU's influential Concussion Legacy Foundation. McCrory, which you may not be surprised to learn, resigned as chair of the Concussion and Sport Group after being accused of plagiarizing stories in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, with the journal removing one of his editorials from 2005 for alleged unlawful and indefensible breach of copyright of the work of one professor. Now, if you're thinking, this guy's not credible at all, trust me, I would not disagree. It might be odd to note that NFL study with horse jockeys was carried out by a researcher who once described American coverage of CTE as carry on and hoo-ha, and a British doctor whose concussion presentations sometimes have included flippant jokes and video of tumbling jockeys set to slapstick music. Guess who presented his findings? You guessed it, that would be Paul McCrory. Shortly after being approached to lead the AFL concussion study, Pierce said McCrory, then the AFL's senior advisor on concussion and a neurologist with the Florey Institute of Neuroscience and Mental Health, contacted him and asked to meet. Pierce said he felt McCrory was trying to tell him what he could and couldn't do with respect to his own research. Quote, he became quite patriarchal and said things like, your idea isn't feasible, these measures are too difficult, blah, 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 your ethics are bad, blah, blah, blah. Once a stooge, always a stooge is Paul McCrory. Thus, Pierce carried on and recruited non-AFL participants. Doing this would be the stark contrast of those in the AFL who suffered concussions and those who did not. These folks had never had a concussion, thus they were labeled the control group. They'd undergo the same tests of the former players. This is, however, where Pierce hit a blockade. Judge as you will with the following passage. He couldn't recruit enough retired AFL players because, as he told The Guardian, the AFL repeatedly refused to give him access to some 600 former players, reneging on their initial promise. It baffled Pierce, who could not understand why the AFL would fund a study and then fail to assist him with the resources needed to do it. Unfortunately, this leads us to another water carrier, that being this man, Dr. Peter Harcourt. Essentially, the AFL limited Pierce, ran the clock out on his study with their funding, then, in my view, sent Harcourt, the AFL's then chief medical officer, to Pierce to tell him players would be made available if they can control the study by imposing their will to dilute it, including the removal of all the tests from Pierce's study, except for one thing, that being TMS. Now, per clinicaltrials.gov, TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation, is a procedure where brain electrical activity is influenced by a magnetic field. Numerous studies using TMS to treat other disorders such as dementia, stroke, cerebral palsy, addictions, depression, and anxiety have shown promise. Though, let's be real, this is the only thing, the one part of the study they would allow Pierce to publish. It's pretty revealing. I told them I couldn't do that, Pierce said, because conducting TMS in isolation isn't enough to diagnose. You need to perform the other tests, like the memory and reaction tests, to draw any reliable conclusions from the results. I told Harcourt the study would produce meaningless data without those additional tests being included. The clock was running out on the study, but it appeared there was some hope. Pierce was given a list of 40 ex-players. The problem was, a lot of these emails appeared to be inactive, and he received a return to sender email. The week before the funding contract with the AFL was going to end, I got an email from Harcourt saying he was really concerned about the lack of data that I had collected from the former players. I wrote back and said, "Thanks for the email, but I've been telling you this for the last year." I told him we needed to perform the full range of tests to get meaningful data. I asked, "Can we catch up and talk about this?" Pierce said. I didn't get a response from him. The contract came and went, and nothing ever saw the light of day from that research. The funding for the study expired, and Pierce, obviously because of everything that occurred, well, it never was finished.